Hello all and welcome back to Broadside. Today's topic, we're again talking about Battleship Row on the attack of Pearl Harbor and just the larger attack in general in Battlestations Midway. Let's get right into it. So before we go in and around in the mission, which allows you to go basically all over a certain section of Pearl Harbor, I want to touch on this photograph from the attack, and I want to point out a couple things to kind of take note of. We have the USS California, we have the Neosho, which is a fleet oiler. California is obviously a battleship. Then we have the Maryland on the inboard of the Oklahoma. We have the Tennessee on the inboard of the West Virginia, as I stretch my arm out. And then we finally get to the Arizona on the inboard of a repair ship called the Vestal. And last but not least, we have the USS Nevada. This is Battleship Row. It's called that for a reason. This is where the majority of the battleships for the United States Pacific Fleet before the war started were anchored. So let's just take note that they're all tied together basically, and that we have some unique ships here, the Vestal and the Neosho. So if we hop into the game, I can take us on a lovely little tour here. We have California, which is basically in its correct location. Love to see that. It would not have looked like this. We'll talk about that a little later. But this is where the USS California was, and when we highlight it, it says it's the USS California. Moving down the line, we have the Neosho, modeled as a fleet oiler, was a fleet oiler in the correct location. That's great. This is where we're going to have some major issues here. We're approaching our battleships, and as you saw from that image, they're really tight together. That's not the case in Battlestations Pacific. Maryland is on the inboard of the Oklahoma, but they're not attached. And we can kind of see down the row here that that's the case for all of these ships. There are these weird gaps that just doesn't make sense. Now, we're talking about historical accuracy. Why do you think they would make these changes? Probably for gameplay's sake. They put us in a PT boat, PT-23. They probably thought it would make it more maneuverable if we separated the battleships out. Why wouldn't the Japanese then drop torpedoes on the likes of the Tennessee and the Maryland? So when we alter things that would change enemy behavior, that's probably, that's a point where I think we're going a little too far. I get that it's probably for gameplay reasons, but yeah, it's definitely a little bit disappointing, I would say. So as we make our way down, again, weird gaps, and then we get to my biggest complaint. And honestly, it's probably something that the first couple of times, quite frankly, I played through, I didn't really take notice of. Now that I'm kind of taking a magnifying glass to this game, we notice this is labeled as the Vestal. I don't know about you, I've never been to the state of Vestal. Didn't know it was one of the 50, had never heard of it. In fact, as we know from that original image, it wasn't a battleship. It should not look anything like the USS Arizona or the Nevada or anything like that. This should be a repair ship. It should be, again, tight against the Arizona. And the fact that they chose to represent it as a battleship, I think, now this is me just guessing here, but I think they're assuming that the players are going through Battleship Row, they only want to see battleships. And so they made the Vestal into a battleship. It's really frustrating because the Vestal plays an important part in the battle. The people on board did their best to kind of save lives when they could. So it's just a little disappointing, I would say, to see it misrepresented. And unfortunately, this is just one example of a couple notable, just complete misses by the developers here for getting ships accurately represented. Just to touch on a few, the USS Pennsylvania doesn't exist in this game, but it was a battleship. It was at a dry dock, but they deleted it from existence. There are two ships here labeled as a Neosho. One of them is accurate, but the other is not. The Oglala was an auxiliary vessel, but it's shown as a light cruiser. Two more light cruisers that are shown here were actually support vessels, and so on and so forth. So they made the effort to get a lot of these ships accurate, the names, Like, they nailed the names. I want to say there's only maybe 2 that weren't there or came in later. But all the other ships that you see, the names are correct. They would have been here at the time, and they were placed pretty accurately. But they switched the model, likely because they thought it was just more visually interesting for the player. To be really nitpicky, they also mislabeled the majority of the battleships number-wise, which is just, again, doesn't change the gameplay, so it's not really a big complaint, but it's something to note. They copied numbers. They were off by 1 or 2 for a bunch of them, so that's weird. Not sure why they would have done that. And then once again, we talk about how they cut the Pennsylvania, but they added 2 random battleships here. One of them, the Vestal, they made into a battleship. And then the New Orleans here, again, not a state, so we know it's inaccurate. But the New Orleans was a heavy cruiser. It was the 3rd most decorated ship for the U.S. Navy during this war. So you'd prefer to get that right. Like, you'd prefer to get all of them right, but especially the ones that made like huge impacts throughout the Pacific War. Yeah, just a little bit frustrating to see that the New Orleans is represented this way, but I digress. The last thing I want to touch on here is something that is particularly frustrating for someone who really likes battleships, who's interested in the battleships that were here. They modeled every single battleship here as 1. They just changed the number. Fair enough. That's probably for the developer's sake, to keep it easy. You just Control C, Control V, copy paste all along. Still looks pretty interesting. I understand it's a 2006-ish title. Maybe resources were tight and all that. My gripe here is that that this specific class of battleship wasn't at the battle. If you're gonna just do 1, at least get 1 that was there. This is a New York class battleship. And here's my argument for that, for why I think it is. Battleships are pretty easy to tell apart if they have a unique turret layout. Turret being the holders of their main guns. There's 5 here. That's really unique for the United States Navy. They typically only do 3 or 4. So 5 kind of stands out. And they're twin guns. Like, there are 2 guns per turret, which means there's 10 guns. Now, cutting down all the options for ships that could have been around at the time, we get the New York class, which had 5 turrets, 2 guns apiece, 10 guns, and looked quite similar to this. Why is this a problem? Well, it's a problem because the USS New York and the USS Texas were not at the battle. You had 4 classes, I believe, you could have chosen from that were actually there, and they changed this for the second game, as we've seen in a previous video, Battlestations Pacific. They have either the USS Tennessee or the USS Pennsylvania. Those are the designs they chose. They did 2. You could have chose one of those 2. Both were there. That would have been an easier choice. Instead, they go with the class that's not even there. That makes no sense to me. I mean, it's so easy to do that right, and they didn't. No explanation for that. But yeah, as you're going through the mission, it gives you the feel for the correct layout, gives you a lot of great, accurate information on names and locations to a point. But if you're looking for a mission that kind of shows what the ships look like, yeah, this is really lackluster, unfortunately, in a lot of different areas, and it's, quite a bit of a letdown. What's more of a letdown is the mission itself. As we play this first mission in Battlestations Midway, we have the opportunity to take command of PT-23, which was at the battle, and is rumored, I can't confirm, to have been the first vessel to shoot down a Japanese plane, but again, I can't confirm that. Either way, it's based in history. That's cool. For the sake of action, the developers of this game kind of chose to give you more power than PT-23 probably had, in that you can shoot down upwards of 30 enemy planes, and that is not even remotely close to what happened during the battle. No single vessel could have done that much damage to those planes. I mean, maybe they could have, but they certainly didn't on the day. So I get that for gameplay and for fun's sake, totally understand. It's the problem of portraying a loss, fighting on the losing side, is that how do you make it more interesting? How do you make it more fun for players? Make it feel like, you know, they're actually, you know, giving it their all and turning the tide. Totally understand that that's a problem. So I can somewhat forgive that. What I struggle with more with this mission are the next phase. So as this mission, like I said, has its problems with showing the player that they can really, you know, turn the tide here, even though we know historically there are many heroes, but the United States does not come on top here. They give us control of, you know, an American fighter, and they have us chase down the Japanese attack planes all the way to the carrier fleet of the Japanese, Kido Butai. That, like, I can't even comprehend, can't even explain to you how wild that would have been if the Japanese, you know, had been driven back to Kido Butai by the Warhawks that managed to get in the air that day. It's just, needless to say, like, that is so far out of reality. Like, I can't even properly convey how wild it is to see this part of the mission. Yeah, the fact that I'm flying over, you know, the likes of the Kaga. Is it fun? I mean, yeah, definitely. So if you go by the rules of if it's fun, then it should be allowed, then absolutely. I just think this is maybe a step too far, and I just want people to know that, yeah, this is just hysterically inaccurate. But that's where I'll leave it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you liked the video, and yeah, subscribe for more similar content.